But we will review some examples in a particular scenario. It's urban scenarios, urban ecosystems. Obviously, for citizen science, urban ecosystems are one of the best because where there are more citizens in urban places. So it's where there are highly concentrated people, and we will see some examples on how we can take benefit on that, particularly having in mind this idea of having high density measurements. But before, just kind of frame again, now there are more and more these ideas of to address certain ecological or socio-ecological problems in a more holistic approach, trying to address not only a single parameter, but many at the same time. And there are like two, I would say, different scenarios. The one is it's addressing the Sustainable Development Goals. I put the example here, and maybe probably you can heard about this idea of One Health concept. One Health is this idea, not only addressing human health or ecosystem health or animal health, to consider all at the same time. So in that particular case, I will try to address this, not as what we have done, but where we want to go. We are planning to go to this idea of One Health and also sustainability. Just to start as a kind of review, and regarding biodiversity, because it's the topic of this talk, I put you a couple of examples on how birds as a target species or a target taxonomic group could be good to address this. And there are several, just a couple of examples of papers related, birds, the biodiversity of birds and connected with human health or human well-being. And I want to give you one example, and it's not mine. I was only participating in that particular one. I was only, citizen scientist. I was not the academic, but it's a kind of reference. It's a very good book. Is that one? It's a breeding birds in Barcelona. It was done in, I don't remember exactly. It was 2006 or something like that. So nearly 20 years ago. But you can see that the volunteers, I was among them, we were kind of freaky, with the binoculars in the middle of the city, spotting birds. And we collected the presence of the breeding of those organisms. And then with this information, the academics were able to infer some abundance maps. And later on, they make a kind of models, high resolution models, and you can identify several streets. I don't know if you've been in Barcelona, but this is what is called diagonal street, because of the diagonal, and you can see that some birds are very frequency there, but you can identify at the level of the street. One of the reasons why it was the number of volunteers. You can see that if you compare the extension of the city with the number of the volunteers, we are high above the rest of the cities. Again, the high density was very one of the reasons why it was so successful, that book, because we collect a lot of data. So imagine more or less 3 volunteers per square kilometer. That's a lot. If you compare, for example, to the rest, only Boronet, it's a city in Russia. Well, I don't know exactly where, but it's only 2. But the rest, it was less than 1 observer per square kilometer. This is something that is somehow related with all I explained it before in terms of the need of high density measurements. The second one that I want to explain to you is the one that we were really involved. It was monitoring the urban beaches. When we started with this idea, people say, why you are wasting your time on monitoring urban beaches? It will be plenty of concrete, plastics, and little more than that. But anyway, we convince, and you can see we go regularly with many people, many volunteers, doing snorkeling in the different beaches of Barcelona. This was possible, as I always mention, in citizen science, we try to identify 4 types of communities, and that's a very key, important issue. Obviously, we have the people, and we have the academics. And in some cases, people believe that citizen science is something related to people and academics. And we mentioned that we really need at least 2 types of different communities. One is the mobilizing community, are the people that are in direct contact with the citizens. For example, we as academics, we cannot, for example, offer guided tours in the beaches. Why? Because we don't have the insurance. There are many, legal implications on offering, guided tours. You need a kind of assurance to be sure that if anything happens, you will be covered. And this can be done by SMEs. And in particular, there was that particular SMEs, Anelides. Anelides, it's a company of two girls that they decided to offer guiding tours in the beaches of Barcelona. So it was a kind of good collaboration between that SME and us, a strong collaboration. So they were the ones offering the guided tours, and we helped them on identifying any single picture that was collected. It was very important to do that. And also the city councils. The city councils were very important because, for example, there is what is called Centro de la Playa. It's a beach center or something like that. It's a building. So imagine whenever we offer a guided tour, so they go with us, but then we can go and have a meeting in that center, and we can discuss with the pictures, what do you think is that? And we can have, nearly what I did yesterday as a kind of demo, but really with many pictures, and then people can discuss, how do you know is that one? And we can have this kind of dialogue with the citizens to engage them. In that particular scenario of urban beaches, we end up with what is called the Participatory Guide. It's a book. It's a book that it was made with all the volunteers. And now it's available in an open repository. It's called Zenodo. Zenodo is an open repository. And you can see this is made with and for the people who love the beaches of Barcelona. And here you can see the list of the volunteers, because all of the pictures that are in that book are from the volunteers. So we basically select the most, I would say, common species that you can find in Barcelona with the pictures coming from the volunteers. So we list all of them, and they are very happy to be, named and acknowledged in an open book. And it's very important, that part, because it's a way, to collect, to engage them, and they are willing to participate more and more and more. There was a very important thing I tried to convince the City Council that we should include part of this marine information. They offer, as an open system, an atlas of the biodiversity in the city. You can go there, and there is an access, but it was, only terrestrial thing, which are the trees of Barcelona, which are the birds of Barcelona, which are the butterflies of Barcelona. I said, guys, and always they think, now we need to, the green of the city, greening the city. Said, what about the blue? We are a coastal city. So finally, we were able to convince them to include here for each beach the information of at the first time of the fishes. And then they realized that there are more fishes than birds. And they were really surprised to that. And this was, in the local newspapers, they were amazed that there were so many birds, so many fishes in that area. So we collected at that time 103. Now we have 126. So we have increased 20% from that time. But this created, a very social impact, if you want, because now the management of the beaches are seen as a completely different way. In the past, it was only, what about, the bars and the place where to play volleyball and so on. And guys, we have a natural heritage there, and we need to conserve that, and we have to deal with that. And it seems that now they acknowledge, because now we've been able also to put crustaceans and mollusks, and now we have more species, marine species, than terrestrial ones. Obviously, because only mollusk is 200 species, and crustaceans is nearly 70. So imagine. Now they said, stop, enough is enough. We don't want more marine, otherwise we will have only marine atlas of Barcelona, and we want also terrestrial one. But nevertheless, they now realize how rich could be even an artificial, because all these beaches are completely artificial. You have to think that after the Olympic Games, they decided to build, it was a very long beach, and now it's split it in different, and they converted in 10 different beaches, which for us now it's very interesting from the academic point of view, because we believe that it's a kind of mesocosm. Every single beach can be treated as a different, In fact, we have found that there are several different communities in different beaches. It's only 5 kilometers, so imagine. But we are just, our institute is in front of one of those beaches. So for us, it's now relatively simple to sample there. And we think that it will be in the future one of the best scenarios to try to understand this high frequency or high small scale heterogeneity of different communities. Why in some beaches we found some of the fishes that are not present in the other, and maybe just 1 kilometer. Why they prefer to live in that one and not in that other one. It's the kind of thing that we think that with this idea of high frequency, we can address this here because it's in front of us, so we can go day by day, we can install things, we can remove, and that's why we think it's one of the perfect scenario, despite the fact it is an artificial one. Also for us, it was important as academics, you know, we had the opportunity in one of the reviews, in Nature reviews, to put this urban beaches monitoring as an example of what can be done in citizen science, in environmental and ecological sciences. So, and the third one, again, about could be the target species in some cases. One of the most interesting is lichens, because lichens are very, you know, sensitive to air quality. And this is one of reference paper I like very much. You can see this is the lichen biodiversity. This is in the north of Italy. So they put high biodiversity as in green and low biodiversity in red. And then they compare with data of long cancer mortality in young men. And you can see that the maps are pretty much the same. So there is a kind of strong correlation between lichen biodiversity and the probability of being died in lung cancer. And this is a kind of reference that it can be treated as a kind of very good story by indicator. So that's why we try to promote also the Citizen Science projects in Minca related to lichen monitoring. I have to tell you that it's quite challenging because, as you know, lichens looks more or less the same. So it's difficult for citizens to be engaged on that. But if you explain them the reason why we are doing this, some of them could be engaged. I think it will take a while. Also, it's difficult, you know, by visual to differentiate species, but they remain there. The advantage is if you take a picture of a rare or something that looks like rare, if you have the geolocation later on, an expert can go there, maybe take a sample, make wherever they do, molecular or microscopic analysis, and this is the kind of thing that we think it could be really useful. And complementary to that, I mentioned, we are also trying to promote this idea of using do-it-yourself devices to measure air quality. This is a homemade device that can collect, and there is attached a mobile app, and basically it measures this concentration, the suspended particles, and you can see there on top, there is more or less the relationship between, in green, what you can see, it's the measurements that they have identified, and in blue, it's more or less the mortality that has been attributed to air quality problems. And you can see that more or less when there is peaks, there is also higher mortality. That's why we think that it's important, this kind of measurements. And this kind of measurements, we did an experiment. You can see in blue all the stations that are in Barcelona related to air quality. Obviously, there are many spatial gaps. So what we try to do is, okay, let's go to one area that there is no information on the stations and see how it goes. So we took one of these devices, and it was one of the volunteers and walking. He made more or less this map. And you can see more or less the values down there. And I put in green what is acceptable from the health point of view, and in red what it could supposed to be much higher above of the threshold. So you can see that basically only in that particular area it was green. The rest was, in some cases I would say warning, and the others say, guys, you have a serious problem on that part. And this is the kind of thing that whenever people talk about this type of devices, they say, wow, but it's very difficult to calibrate, it's very complicated to ensure that they have accurate measurements, but maybe we don't need very, very accurate. As I mentioned many times, if I have these values, so you know, the health recommendation is it has to be below 10 micrometers per micrograms per cubic meter. So if I have 80, do I care if it's 80 or 70 or 60? It's high above 10. So maybe I can put the red sign here, and that's enough. So maybe we can start just by, collecting those red lights and green lights, and later on, just if we have a map and it's plenty of red, there we have a problem. It's in some cases green and red, okay, and it's completely green, okay, this is fine. And this is the type of, maybe that we don't need really a very accurate measurements, what we need is a lot of measurements. And this is the kind of thing. And just to give you an idea, I tried to map, there are only just a few lichens already mentioned, but you can see that in the area that it was green, these are reported lichens in Barcelona. Here, nobody is reporting anything, because probably there is no lichens. The problem is that the air quality is so bad that they cannot live there, or only maybe some of them. It's a very, I would say, the number of samples is very small already, but we think that we can correlate somehow this particularly, and this is the area, well, I don't know, but Barcelona is surrounded by hills, and this is one of the hills, and probably it's the one, because it's at the top, the air quality there, it's much better than the rest. And that's why there you can find some lichens, despite that they are very small. It's not like lichens in the woodland, but small ones. But they have identified, I would say, as a kind of hotspot on biodiversity of lichens in Barcelona, relatively, okay? So we will try to combine both. And basically, on top of that, also, there is another type of air quality that I think is very interesting, is that the one it's very difficult to measure. It's, for example, odors. Odor collection is very important, because if you live in a place that you have bad odors, it's very annoying. But it's very difficult, to denounce. How do you denounce that there is bad odor in your area? And maybe there are someone, they have, I don't know, a restaurant that they are doing something, or they have any kind of activity, commercial activity, that it produces bad odor. But it's very complicated, to manage that, unless there are a lot of reportings. And this can be done with this type of devices, that basically it's people that collects the odor perception, and if you have plenty of those, you can increase the management and maybe identify what is the problem, if there is one problem, and try to correct it. And this is the kind of thing. So basically, and just a kind of summary, the next steps for us is, first, this idea that I mentioned, this idea of creating these holistic approaches in which we can combine, for example, why not, odor with particles, with biodiversity indicators. And these kind of things that can produce probably in the future indexes of health, I would say urban health, and you want to have all of them at the same time. In the particular case of biodiversity, it's very important probably to identify, as you mentioned, there is a main problem to try to collect all of them, but maybe we can identify why not lichens, why not maybe other types, birds at the same times, because birds, it seems that, for example, are very good indicators also in acoustic contamination. They are sensitive to acoustic contamination. The idea of how to improve the engagement of participants. We are working a lot of that, because it's a key issue. If we want to this high density of values, we need to engage people at long term. And that's why, for example, starting with acknowledge them in any kind of contribution. That's why we put, for example, in the book, all the list of the people. We want also, you are pushing a lot that if, maybe you know that in many of those platforms, all this data goes to, later on to large aggregators, so such as GBIF or large database aggregators, and many academics use that data, ignoring completely the origin of that data. We try to convince them that we should have tracking the origin of that data and acknowledge all of them whenever you use data of citizen science. It's very important data. And finally, our aim is try to combine in this holistic system, try to combine people engaged on reporting biodiversity, but on top of that, environmental issues. We think, well, at least our experience is, it's much easier to engage people on tracking animals, organisms, birds, even lichens, than others, or unless there is a bad odor. Because if there is a bad odor, people then complain a lot and they are very active. But if you have no bad, we want to have both. Where is the good odor and where is the bad odor? And these kind of things, it's important. That's why we try now in our platform in Minca, trying now to open the possibility to report biodiversity, not only biodiversity, but also environmental observations, and try to have this kind of holistic approach. And basically, as you can see, it was a little bit much faster, but I think it combines a little bit this idea of the need of high density measurements in the particular case of urban, but also connected with this all aliasing on problems that I mentioned in the first part. So, well, it takes only 15 minutes, but we have 15 minutes to discuss a little bit more.
Yeah, thank you very much. When I hear about lichens, I always okay, because I'm lichenologist.
Okay.
My colleague, Professor Pier is the author of this paper.
Okay.
A couple of months
ago. Great.
We're working on this. And we were discussing this to do the same type of study for Yerevan, and that's actually my question, because you got some lichen desert in between those parts, but it's not only about the pollution. For instance, in case of Yerevan, it's lichen desert because it's a semi-arid ecosystem. So it's not easy only think about the, let's say, changes of air pollution, because maybe because of some mountains you have more humidity in this part of the city and less in that part, and it creates this more, let's say, worse or better condition for lichens. So this is the first, just as an observation. Second, do you have an experience with, let's say, more population size type of studies? That because it's all present absence data when you have, then you can have abundance maps and so on. But I was more wondering if you have an experience and you can share with it regarding the observations of population size.
Yeah.
Because it would be good for monitoring purposes, because it's mostly criticized, I mean, by, let's say by national level or local scientists, that we cannot apply this methodology in terms of, maybe in case of some establishing some laws or something else. Could you a bit elaborate on this?
Yeah. First, you are absolutely right. It was a very simple question, and that's why it's so important to address from the holistic point of view. So you are absolutely right that maybe some of these lichen deserts, it's not deserts. It's not related to pollution. It could be many other types. That's why it's so important, this holistic approach, that not only getting measurements on the presence or occurrence of lichens, not only on pollution, but also other type of environmental variables as well, trying to understand finally what is going on. That's why this idea of holistic. And regarding the population size, well, we have a PhD now working on that, and particularly in the case of the beaches, because not all the beaches are frequently visited in a homogeneous way. There are some beaches because you have the parking closer, or the facilities to be doing snorkeling or scuba diving. They are much more visited than others. We have the advantage now that trying first to identify this effect on observations and how to correct, because we have the advantage. So imagine in the north of Barcelona, this one is the most visited, and obviously is the one with more reported species. In the middle, there are some of them that are with less species. But now what we will do is some kind of experiments, going there, increasing the observation, and see, for example, if the absence of particular species is because it was only based on there were less observations. We don't know exactly how to correct that, but we are trying now to address, and maybe, hopefully, there could be any kind of statistical or, data analysis systems that allows you to normalize a little bit that problem. Also, we are thinking, obviously, if we want to go to abundance in terms of numerical value, it will be very challenging. But in some cases, we can go in a much simpler thing, only say this is abundant or it's not abundant, levels of abundancy. So imagine that if you go there, the chances of seeing that particular species is really high. Or in some cases, if you go there, you need to spend a lot of time to report it. And if you go there, or you are an expert and you spend a lot of time, or you will not spot it, or it's absent. So imagine that maybe 4 or 5 abundance scales could be relatively achievable and corrected, and it will be a little more robust statistical from the to these differences on visiting factor. We are thinking on moving in this direction. We have not finalized it yet, but we have the advantage that because these beaches from the first one to the last one, it's only 5 kilometers, we can repeat several experiments sorry, to see up to which point these differences of observations, because I can tell you that now we have in all the beaches like 40,000 observations, but these 40,000 observations, maybe, I don't know, 15,000 are on the most visited beaches and the 30,000 on the rest. So we can combine or try to promote some experiments to see if those differences that we are observing is because of the difference of observation or because, the community is different.
What about, let's say, establishing some maybe plots and, for instance, for invasive species, monitoring, and to see how this is expanding and so on,
Yeah.
make it more, let's say, accountable.
Yeah, well, that's the long-term goal. So now we are focused on very short, I would say, scale, but later on, as I told you tomorrow, we are also addressing the whole coast. That is 300 kilometers. But we will not have so much control on that, so we are doing that now, the experiments there, and trying later on to understand the differences all over this 300-kilometer coast, and hopefully in the future all over, say, Mediterranean or whatever else.
Can you tell us how global where else is it being playing out? I grew up at the beach near Scripps Institute.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know if
Yeah,
engaged.
yeah. There is, in the States, there is a lot. And particularly, I haven't mentioned in this talk, but yesterday talk, and tomorrow I will talk about that. There is one initiative, it's called iNaturalist, that for biodiversity, it has been very successful, particularly in the United States, but not only in the United States, but also Latin America, Australia, and it's getting more and more. People now realizing, at the beginning you say, it's too noisy. But then now, because they are realizing how important is this, if you can see, maybe tomorrow I can show, there is one graphic very illustrative, that now the proportion of data, for example, these large data aggregators, now 90% comes from Citizen Science, and 10% only from, I would say, academic institutions. And so you can see the curve of academics like this, and the Citizen Science like this. So I think it will be a matter of few years that it will be spread all over the world. Obviously, there are some areas that, because their socioeconomic capabilities, it's easier to have more people engaged. But we think that we will try to manage also to adapt and to help in those areas that are more difficult to engage people, to find a way that finally all people, because we need data from everywhere. Obviously, cities are very important because cities are the highest population density. But for example, in the particular case that I will talk tomorrow, in the south of Catalonia, the density of population is much less, so we have some differences on that, and we want to understand all the phenomena, because at the end it's the matter of global phenomena, global warming or pollution or I don't know, marine litter. It's not a matter of one place, it's a global, and that's why we need to collect data all over the places.
And do you remain engaged with the citizens who are conducting this?
Yes, but as I mentioned, and I put a little bit, for us, what is key is to find this kind of mobilizing community. We need, I would say, local ambassadors, people that they do believe that it's very important, and are the ones that are in direct connection with the citizens. We can help citizens, and sometimes I think it's very important, this local, the experience that, academics sometimes, they do snorkel with us. And this can be only done locally. So we need local academics, we need local mobilizing community. We can provide and facilitate them all the, previous lesson learned, whatever tools, but I cannot, for example, here, even Sevan, I think that you need several locals in several places to engage the whole system, no matter the whole Armenia. For us, it's the same. We are, in the north part of Spain, and we speak a different language, a local language, and we do a lot of this in local language as well. So I can convince some colleagues of mine all over Spain that they will become an ally for us, but I cannot go to Galicia or Andalusia and be living in Barcelona. And it's key to find this local mobilizing community and this local academic community as well. But also local facilitating, local city councils, local government, it's also important as well.
One concern about this, I think, in the process of recruiting citizen scientists is there's been some work that looks at, from an environmental justice perspective, what is the background of people who are likely to volunteer to collect citizen science. You mentioned the expansion of iNaturalist in the US. There's a study that looked at, there's a lot higher density in areas with higher education levels, higher income levels. I'm curious, your experience with this project, how do you think about that kind of bias in the data, and how do you go about mitigating that both from a scientific perspective and understanding the data, but also from a social science perspective and thinking about what's motivating people to do this and how can it be scaled to be a broader representation?
Well, I have to tell you that it's part of our research. I always also put the example of remote sensing. In the 70s, when remote sensing started, some people say, come on, are you telling me that you will take one picture thousands of kilometers above the atmosphere and you can give me which is the concentration of chlorophyll or the sea surface temperature? You're kidding. There is the atmosphere, there are many, uncertainties. You cannot retrieve that properly. But during these 50 years, more or less, there has been radiative transfer theory. So, background, solid theoretical background that identifies which would be the atmospheric effect and how to correct the atmospheric effect. I think with the citizen science, we have more or less the same. We started with some volunteers and people say, come on, are you telling me that now hundreds of, volunteers can give us meaningful information? There are a lot of uncertainties at the same. We need to fix, I would say, the solid theory. If you want theoretical citizen science, which are the effects on different types of population, different density of population, but it's the same, for me, it's the same that the radiative transfer theory. So we are now putting a lot of effort on understanding all these phenomena and try to correct, as we correct all the atmospheric effects in remote sensing, all the social effects, if you want, on the volunteer participation, to try to correct this or normalize and say, okay, now it's the data provided with these volunteers in this place of the world and these volunteers are comparable because we have corrected all, I would say, local socio-ecological, if you want, framework or scenarios. But it's part of our research. I cannot give you a complete answer because we are in the process of understanding also the motivation of the people, all these kind of things, and how we can compensate in those cases that are different people participating.
I don't know if you have any follow-up on that. I don't know if you have any specific example where you tried this citizen science project and maybe the work wasn't very successful, and then you changed one thing, and bam, it went into efficiency.
I don't have any particular from my experience. The only thing is that what I've seen is that 15 years ago, you talk about volunteer data and they said, this is great. Now, forget it. And now, there are more and more studies that they are now convinced on that. We are now, for example, involved in one particular project that the European Commission is willing to accept citizen science data in the legal framework or in the management framework. And they are asking us how you can certify somehow that this data could be valid. Imagine the other. I want to go to denounce someone because you are doing some practice and this created by other, and this bad other, it's affecting all the neighborhood. Now, it will be very difficult, I guess, if you go with something like this, to be accepted. But imagine that we can try or to identify methods to certify this or validate this and say, guys, this is real. And I think that slowly this is changing. For example, in the case of air quality, all this movement of these small devices started in Colombia, in Bogota, because they have a lot of air quality pollution. And at the beginning, but now the mayor, they said, we will include that type of measurements, because they said, no, our stations, they say that our air is really good, yeah, but our stations are in the middle of the parks. Yeah, are in the middle of the parks. Come on, guys, why you don't measure? And this happened also, if you want, here. So imagine if you don't put a station there, obviously you will never find bad data. But the spatial gap is huge. So I've seen several examples. I can give you, for example, a clear example in a completely different scenario. But I was involved in the past with some carbon cycle, and they use what is called eddy covariance with something, and there is this eddy covariance towers, really expensive. So maybe in the whole Spain, there are like 5. And one of the guys told me, Jaume, we did experiments, and we put 2 of them, and then we start separating and see when it started being decorrelated, 800 meters. So imagine if at 800 meters, the data is completely uncorrelated. That means that this one is represented only on a radius of 800, and maybe the next one is 300 kilometers on distance. So what kind of information you are retrieving? Even you are spending millions of euros on building such a kind of towers, unless you have plenty of towers. Otherwise, what kind of flux are you estimating? It's maybe completely wrong. So these are the kind of things that now people are starting understanding that maybe with a much simpler device, or maybe another type of bioindicator or whatever else, we can get better information at the end.
And also just to remark, 70% of GBIF data is Citizen Science. So you cannot simply ignore it.
Yeah,
because especially in terms of, global indicators like for Kunimura, GBF and so on, so you should use this data. You cannot just keep it. Because you don't have other, sources. Even it's not so accurate and so on, you can put a lot of different labels on it. But you don't have other options, because it's really expensive, time and resource consuming to collect, let's say, only expert-based data. You will not have it.
yeah. And it's not doable. I mean, you cannot cover everything of this, plenty of, high expensive instrument stations. It's not affordable. And also you need technicians, expertise people on calibrating and so on to ensure the accuracy. And it's not feasible. The only way you can do, why not? Imagine, for example, people cycling. They are really interested on knowing where is the air quality, the good air quality, because then I can choose which street I will take today. So imagine like a kind of map. So you open the map and say, look, it's plenty of red here, here green. Okay, I will take this path today, because this can change very fast. So, for example, for us, the cycling community, it could be one of the first interested on reporting such a kind of data like this, because if we can process this and we put red areas in one day, and this is happening. And in some cases, I know that, for example, in Colombia, they are using this type of devices in one particular place, and they realize, for example, that early in the morning is the worst case scenario. And there is where people are used to go running. Say, guys, avoid early in the morning. It's the worst time of the day to go for running, because it's the worst quality of the air. Do it at night maybe, or something like that. So this can change a little bit the behavior and also understanding, which is the management of the urban system.
Any more questions?
Oh, okay, thank you very much.
Thank you again.
Thank you so much.